In the thick fog of a forgotten forest, the horse stands still, before an old oak, the childhood place of a girl who never came home. Lara kneels, hands trembling as she digs through cold earth, until her fingers graze the first tiny bone. Next to it, a half-burned red ribbon still clings to the edge of a sleeve. Bandit doesn't move, doesn't blink, just watches like a soul that has kept its promise for 7 long years. No words, just breath, just eyes, and the truth screaming up from beneath the soil. Subscribe now and never miss a story that dares to remember what the world forgot. It was a late autumn afternoon when Lara arrived at her grandparents' farm in the Adelaide Hills. The sky was a pale milky gray, the kind that pressed close to the ground and made the world feel smaller. Her mother had said little during the drive, not that Lara had expected otherwise. Since the divorce, silence had become a third person in their home, constant, shapeless, heavy. She stepped out of the car, her sneakers crunching softly on gravel. The air was cooler here than in the city. Cleaner, sharper, smelling faintly of pine and something older like wood smoke buried deep in the ground. Her grandfather emerged from the barn with a tired smile and arms that opened, hesitant but hopeful. She walked into them without a word. Lara didn't cry. Not when her mother left without a backward glance. Not when the door closed behind her like a sigh. Not even when she looked around the old wooden house and realized how far it felt from everything she'd known. Grief for Lara was quiet. It moved like fog unnoticed until it soaked everything. Her grandparents tried. They made her porridge with brown sugar and cinnamon, offered warm socks and old books. Her grandmother put fresh flowers in a vase on her windowsill every morning. But Lara spoke little. She ate politely. She smiled when expected, but it was a borrowed expression, thin and uncertain. Most nights she dreamed the same dream, a dense forest mist curling between trunks like whispers. A little girl stood in the clearing, her dress tattered at the hem, her hands clutching a long red ribbon that trailed behind her, tied to the neck of a large black horse. The girl never moved. She just stared into Lara, it felt like with eyes that didn't blink. In the mornings, Lara would wake to birdsong and the slow hum of the farm coming to life. But the dream clung to her, even in daylight. The red ribbon haunted her thoughts, vivid frayed, always leading somewhere just out of reach. One afternoon, after her grandmother fell asleep reading on the porch, Lara wandered beyond the fence line, past the paddock through the tall grass into a grove of ghost gums that shimmered white against the fading sun. She wasn't looking for anything. Or maybe she was. Either way, something found her. He stood at the edge of the clearing, just beyond the trees, half shadow and half statue. A horse larger than most, jet black, with a jagged white scar slashing from shoulder to chest. His eyes were dark, but aware, like he was waiting for something. He didn't flinch when Lara stepped closer. He didn't run. He simply stood the wind, catching his mane like breath. Lara stopped a few feet away. Her breath hitched. He was beautiful, yes, but there was something else. Something quiet and immense. Like standing before the ocean at midnight. She whispered, "Hey," her voice cracking with disuse. The horse tilted his head ever so slightly as if he understood. She didn't tell her grandparents that night. Not about the dream, not about the horse. Some things felt too strange to say aloud, and besides, she wasn't sure she could explain it. The connection had been silent, but undeniable, like 2 pieces of a puzzle clicking into place after years of being scattered. The next day she returned. The horse was there again, exactly where she'd left him, as though he hadn't moved all night. This time she took a small apple from the kitchen, held it out on her palm, fingers shaking. He stepped forward slowly, deliberate. Took the fruit gently, his lips brushing her skin. "Bandit," she said softly. The name had come unbidden, but once spoken it felt right. Like he'd been waiting to be named. That night, the dream returned. But this time it was different. The girl Anna Lara knew now looked directly at her and mouthed something, "Find me." Behind her, the red ribbon gleamed in the moonlight, tied tight around the horse's throat. Bandit stood beside the girl, his scar catching the silver glow like a map. Lara woke with a gasp, heart pounding. She looked out the window. Far beyond the fields barely visible in the first light of dawn, stood Bandit still as stone watching the house. In school, Lara had learned about coincidences and rational thought. But what she felt now had nothing to do with science. It was the quiet certainty of instinct, the feeling in your bones when something old and true stirs beneath your skin. Bandit was not just a stray horse. He was something else. A messenger, a guide, a shadow returning for what had been lost. Over the next days, Lara visited him often. She brought him apples, brushed out his tangled mane with her fingers, sat beside him, and said nothing for hours. She didn't need to speak. He seemed to understand her silences, mirrored them back with his stillness. One evening, she brought a piece of red yarn from her grandmother's sewing box. Tentatively, she tied it around Bandit's neck, loose, gentle, a simple loop. He didn't flinch. In fact, he lowered his head, eyes closing for a moment like a prayer. That night in her dream, the red ribbon around the girl's hand glowed brighter. And this time she spoke aloud. "You're close." Lara began to change. Subtly, but undeniably. She no longer avoided her grandfather's questions. She helped her grandmother with dishes, even sang softly to the dog. Her smile, when it came, was still small, but it was real. Bandit had awakened something dormant in her purpose. A quiet flame that burned beneath the ash. But it wasn't just healing that Bandit brought, it was knowing. A kind of remembering that didn't come from memory, but from something deeper. Every time she touched his scar, she saw flashes, smoke, screaming children running. A barn engulfed in flame, a red ribbon caught in the wind disappearing into black. She began writing them down, sketching the girl, mapping the forest paths Bandit led her through. She didn't tell her grandparents. She couldn't. This was something she had to follow alone. The townsfolk spoke of the horse too sometimes. "Old ghost out there," one man muttered in the general store. "Swear I saw him 10 years ago. Thought he'd burned with the stables, but no one knew for sure." Stories drifted in like smoke, never quite tangible, always just out of grasp. One morning, Lara stood in the clearing where she'd first found Bandit. The mist was thick that day, curling low and cold around her ankles. She waited. He came. No bridle, no saddle. Just the scar, and the ribbon faded now, but still red. He walked to her, stopped inches away. She looked into his eyes and said, "I'm ready." What she meant she couldn't say. But Bandit understood. He always did. Behind them, the forest held its breath. And somewhere far off a voice whispered, "Bring her home." The days following Lara's discovery of Bandit unfolded like pages in a dream. Quiet, intimate, oddly inevitable. She visited him each morning, long before the roosters cried, before her grandmother began to clatter pans, or her grandfather shuffled out to check the fences. The world at that hour belonged only to Lara and Bandit. She never brought a saddle, never tried to control him. He came to her willingly, now meeting her at the edge of the glade like a promise kept. She would rest her forehead against his, close her eyes, and breathe. There was something sacred in that silence, something deeper than words could reach. Lara still barely spoke to the adults in her life. Her voice, when used, felt foreign, rusted at the edges. But around Bandit, she whispered. Short phrases, half thoughts. He responded with a flick of the ear, a quiet nudge, the occasional low exhale that curled in the morning chill like smoke. She began to think of him not as a horse, but as something older. Something woven from the same strange fabric as her dreams, because the dreams had returned vivid and visceral. Every night the same little girl appeared, bare feet, a dress grayed with soot and time, and that unmistakable ribbon of red. Tied to her wrist, it trailed behind her like a tether, connecting her to something unseen. Sometimes she stood in the woods. Sometimes she floated just beyond the barn's skeletal remains. But always she said the same words, "Bring me home." Lara didn't know why the words filled her with such urgency, only that they did. She started drawing again. Not horses like she used to. Now she sketched forests, barns, flames licking the night sky. The girl, the ribbon. Her notebooks filled quickly, scrawled with half-finished maps and charcoal smudges that left her fingers stained. Bandit watched her draw. She often sat cross-legged beside him in the grass, the red yarn still looped loosely around his neck. Sometimes he would press his nose to the page as if approving the likeness. Other times he simply stood still, head lowered, eyes unreadable. Her grandmother noticed the change first. Lara, though, still quiet, no longer drifted like a ghost through the house. She hummed while folding laundry. She offered to feed the chickens. There was color in her cheeks again, a glint of something returning in her gaze. Bandit's good for her. Her grandmother told her husband one evening, watching Lara through the kitchen window as she sat with the horse under the fading light. Her grandfather, less romantic, frowned. "I don't like it. That horse isn't tagged. We don't know where he came from." That concern led to the call. 2 days later, the town's only large animal vet drove up the gravel path, his truck rattling with gear. Dr. Hayes was kind in the gruff way of someone who'd seen too much and spoken too little about it. He greeted Lara with a nod and approached Bandit slowly. The horse didn't move. He stood still as stone while Hayes ran the scanner over his neck, and then froze. A sharp beep. A number blinked on the reader. Dr. Hayes stared at it, then looked again. His face, once relaxed, went tight. "That can't be right," he muttered. He scanned again. Same result. "What is it?" Lara asked, her voice low. Hayes hesitated. "This horse was registered 7 years ago." Her grandmother stepped closer. "Well, that's good, isn't it? We can find his owner." "No," Hayes said. "You don't understand. This horse, Bandit." He glanced at Lara, unsure how much to say. He was reported dead 7 years ago. The silence that followed was absolute. Dr. Hayes pulled out a tablet, tapped into the registry. The information was there. A jet-black gelding. Slight white blaze on the chest, deep scar from a shoulder injury during a stable collapse. Registered name Midnight's Echo. Nicknamed Bandit. Officially declared deceased in a fire that destroyed Pine Hollow Equine Center, a youth riding camp. Lara stepped back. Her pulse thrummed in her ears. It was a big deal at the time. Hayes went on quieter now. 4 kids died. 1 horse missing. They assumed he perished too. He looked up. "I treated some of those kids. I remember this horse. He shouldn't be standing here." Lara didn't cry. But something shifted in her chest, sharp and strange. Like the echo of a scream swallowed years ago. That night her dreams turned darker. She saw the barn ablaze. Wood snapping in waves of fire. Screams. Smoke. The red ribbon flickering like a flame as the little girl Anna Lara knew it now ran pulling the horse behind her. Then everything turned white. She woke before dawn, sweat-drenched fingers tangled in her blanket. The next morning Lara went looking for answers. She asked her grandmother about the fire. At first the old woman said little, but the name Pine Hollow broke something loose. "Oh," she said slowly. "Yes, that was a terrible thing. It was a summer camp. Children went every year. One night, lightning struck the barn, they said. Or maybe it was an electrical fault. I don't know." "Did you know any of the kids?" Lara asked. "No, but one of them." Her grandmother hesitated. "One of them was from here, from our town. Little Anna Keating. Sweet girl, quiet. She loved horses, like you." Lara felt the ground shift again. That evening, she sat with Bandit longer than usual. The sun dipped low, painting the fields in gold. She rested her hand on his scar. "You were there," she whispered. "You saw it all." Bandit didn't flinch. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the sketch she'd made of the girl. She held it up. "Her name is Anna. She wants to come home." For a moment, the world held its breath. Then Bandit took a step forward. Just one. The message was clear. The following days blurred. Lara became consumed with research. At the local library, she unearthed old newspaper clippings hidden behind decades of garden fair winners and livestock show results. 4 children dead in camp barn fire, the headline read. There were photos. Grainy, distant. But one showed a little girl with a familiar face sitting atop a black horse, Anna. She was smiling, her hand on the mane, a ribbon bright red trailing from her wrist. Below the image, a caption, "Anna Keating, age 9, on Bandit the horse." Taken 2 weeks before the fire. Lara traced the outline of the girl's hand. It was real. not just a dream. She tore out the page and carried it with her always, folded into her jacket, hidden beneath her pillow. It became a talisman. Proof. When she told her grandparents, they listened carefully. There was fear in their eyes, but also something else, belief. "You think he came back?" her grandfather said slowly, to finish what wasn't finished. "Yes," Lara replied, "to bring her home." They didn't laugh. They didn't tell her to stop. Instead, her grandmother gave her a candle. "For her," she said, "when the time comes." That night, Lara rode Bandit for the first time. No saddle, no bridle. Just her hands in his mane, the wind in her ears, and the beat of something ancient beneath her. He didn't need guidance. He moved as though retracing old memories, each step a return. They galloped through meadows and over low fences, through the old orchard, where the trees leaned like old men. She saw flickers of red among the leaves, ribbons caught in branches like breadcrumbs left behind. And the voice? Anna's voice grew louder. "You're close." At dawn, Lara dismounted in the clearing behind the property, heart pounding. Bandit turned his head toward the woods. Lara followed his gaze. Beyond the trees, barely visible in the early light, stood the remnants of a forgotten path, overgrown, hidden. Waiting. A road back, a way through, a beginning. Lara knew no one would believe her. Not fully. Not the way she needed them to. That Bandit was the same horse from the fire. The fire was an idea too large, too unthinkable. Logic would swallow it whole. So she didn't try to explain. She acted. With a notepad tucked under her sweater and a blunt pencil behind her ear, Lara started walking. House to house, farm to farm, asking questions. Most thought she was just being curious. An awkward, polite girl with big eyes and quiet steps. She let them think that. But inside, she was hunting something specific, the truth behind Anna Keating and the fire that had burned Pine Hollow to ash. She began with Mrs. Doolin, the oldest resident on the ridge. The woman opened her screen door with suspicion, then softened when she saw Lara. "You're one of the Morgan kids, ain't you?" Lara nodded. "I'm looking for information about the old horse camp. Pine Hollow." The air changed, just slightly, enough to notice. Mrs. Doolin narrowed her eyes. That was a long time ago. Lara waited. Eventually, the woman exhaled long and slow. Tragic business. The fire came in the middle of the night. Took 4 little ones and most of the barn with it. Place never reopened. They bulldozed the rest. "Do you remember Anna Keating?" Lara asked. Mrs. Doolin's face softened even further. "Oh, Anna. Sweet girl. Lived up the valley. Loved horses more than she loved people. I think that's why she was at that camp. Her parents thought it'd help her open up." A pause. Didn't work out that way. At the mention of Bandit, Mrs. Doolin blinked. The black horse, the one they never found, folks assumed he was ashes like the rest. "You know, some kids swore they saw him running into the woods, ribbon flapping from his neck." Lara's chest tightened. "Red ribbon." "Yup, like blood. You don't forget a detail like that." From there, the trail thickened. She hit the town library, a 2-room cottage lined with books that smelled like dust and memories. Miss Janine, the librarian, was cautious about letting a 12-year-old girl dig through archives, but relented after Lara returned 3 days in a row with the same quiet determination. She found microfilms, yellowed clippings, obituaries. 4 children lost in campfire. Tragedy in the hills. The headline ran across the front page. A picture below showed the barn, mid-burn wooden beams, collapsing smoke turning the sky black. Names were listed: Anna Keating, Bryce Dunn, Tara Lou, and Milo Samuels. Anna's name was last, but Lara only saw her. She flipped further and found a smaller photo likely taken before the tragedy. "A charity event," the caption said. Horses, kids, laughter. There, standing proudly, was Anna on top of a large black horse. Her dress was pale, her boots scuffed. But the defining mark was unmistakable, a red ribbon tied around the horse's neck, trailing like a sash. Lara traced her finger over the image. Bandit. It was him. She didn't bring the clipping home. She didn't tell her grandparents. She folded it quietly into her sketchbook behind a pencil drawing of Anna's face from her dreams. The next day, Lara visited Bandit. He was waiting for her, as always, at the grove's edge. The scar down his shoulder caught the sun, a silver thread across his dark coat. She didn't speak, just held the photo to her chest. Bandit lowered his head. A deep breath escaped him, as though some unspoken weight had been acknowledged. Then, without warning, he turned and walked deeper into the woods, slower than usual, deliberate. Lara followed. They moved through the forest in silence. Leaves crunched beneath her boots. Overhead birds flitted nervously. The further they went, the older everything felt. Twisted trunks, moss-covered stones, trees bowed like mourners. Bandit led her to a fork in the trail she'd never seen before. One path led downhill into shadows. The other curved upward toward the old ridgeline. Without hesitation, Bandit chose the darker trail. Lara hesitated for only a moment before stepping in behind him. The path narrowed quickly. Vines reached across like fingers. Tree roots curled up from the earth, threatening to trip her. But Bandit walked smoothly, as if the terrain remembered him and made room. Eventually, the trees parted. Ahead was an open glade bathed in eerie light. The wind shifted. Lara smelled something ash, faint but real, like smoke pressed into bark. She stepped forward and saw what remained the charred foundation of a building. Stone outlines, rusted hinges, a melted plaque half buried in dirt. She didn't need a sign to know. Pine Hollow. Bandit stood at the edge, unmoving. Lara approached slowly, her heart thudding. Here the past wasn't buried. It was etched into every blackened beam and collapsed wall. Memories clung like cobwebs. She crossed what would have been the threshold and saw them ribbons. Dozens. Red frayed scattered across the wreckage. Some tied to posts, others tangled in the bushes. All faded by sun and time, but unmistakably red. One of them fluttered, though there was no wind. Lara moved closer. She knelt and picked it up. Her fingers trembled. The ribbon was knotted. The kind of knot a child would tie. And at the center, a small charm metal heart-shaped singed around the edges. Etched into it, A.K. Anna Keating. Lara clutched it to her chest. "I'm here," she whispered. "I found you." The glade fell silent. Even the birds held their breath. Then Bandit whinnied low and long and stepped into the clearing. He circled once, then stopped at a patch of earth near the old feed shed. His hooves pawed at the dirt, slow but insistent. Lara walked over. He looked at her, down at the ground, back at her. Understanding surged through her. This was where Anna had run. This was where she had fallen, and where the world had chosen to forget. Until now, Lara dropped to her knees, her hands pressing into the cold soil. She didn't dig, not yet. She simply placed the ribbon and charm on the ground. She needed time. She needed someone to help her do this right. That night she dreamed again, but this time Anna wasn't standing. She was walking toward her. The ribbon no longer dragged. It was tied neatly around her wrist. She smiled and spoke, almost home. When Lara awoke, her pillow was damp with tears she hadn't realized she'd cried. She dressed quickly and ran downstairs. Her grandparents were seated at the table sipping coffee. They looked up, startled by her urgency. "I need your help," she said. They listened, truly listened, while she explained. About the photo, the ribbons, the clearing, Bandit. Her grandfather paled. "You found the camp." Her grandmother covered her mouth. "I think she's there," Lara said softly. "I think—" Anna never left. There was no laughter, no dismissal. Her grandfather stood slowly, pulled on his boots and said, "Show me." They walked together. Lara, her grandfather, and Bandit back to the glade. Her grandfather knelt beside the spot Bandit had marked. He pressed a hand to the earth and closed his eyes, then nodded. "I'll call the police and the coroner." Lara looked at him, afraid. "Will they take Bandit?" "No," her grandfather said. "He's not a witness. He's the one who remembered." As they left the clearing, Lara glanced back once more. The ribbons danced, and somewhere she thought a girl was finally resting easier. Lara first heard the name whispered by a librarian, half warning, half confession. "If you're digging into Pine Hollow," Miss Janine said, pushing a dusty folder across the counter, "you'll want to talk to Alex Weller. He worked there. But don't expect much. He hasn't spoken to anyone in years. Not since the fire." The name sounded ordinary, but Lara would come to know it like a cornerstone. Alex Weller lived alone at the edge of town, in a weather-worn cottage behind a neglected orchard. People said he used to be gentle, even cheerful, a man who could soothe wild stallions with a whisper. But after the fire, he'd disappeared. Not entirely, he still bought groceries once a week, but enough that kids dared each other to knock on his gate and run. Lara didn't knock. She waited. Bandit stood beside her in the dusk, motionless. The wooden gate creaked as the wind moved it. Lara looked up at the windows, curtains drawn paint-chipped. Then a shadow shifted behind the screen door. "You're on private land," a voice called. Gravelly, rusted shut from disuse. Lara didn't flinch. "I'm not here to bother you. I'm here for her." A pause. A shuffle of feet behind the door. Her. Lara reached into her jacket, pulled out the photo she'd folded and unfolded 100 times. She held it high. Anna Keating and Bandit, the red ribbon, the fire, silence. Then the screen door creaked open 2 inches. Enough to reveal an eye-sharp Weary, watching her like a stray dog. "You know that name?" the voice said lower now. "You're too young to remember it, but you know it." Lara nodded. "You shouldn't," he added. "That story should have stayed buried." "But it didn't," she said. "Because Bandit came back." Alex stepped out fully now. He was older than she expected, mid-70s maybe, but his frame still carried the ghost of strength. His hands were calloused, his face carved with deep lines, eyes gray as slate, and behind all of it, sorrow. Heavy, settled sorrow, the kind that didn't move, even with time. He looked at Bandit. Bandit looked back. "I thought he was dead," Alex muttered. "I thought I was." He didn't invite her in. He just sat on the porch and lit a cigarette with trembling fingers. Lara stood. She didn't need a chair. She needed answers. "They told everyone it was faulty wiring," Alex began. "Said the lightning storm made the barn go up like dry kindling. It was easier that way. Easier than admitting we failed them." Lara remained quiet. "I was in charge of the night rounds," he said. "Checking stalls, making sure no lanterns were left burning. I'd just finished feeding the colts when the smell hit me. Smoke. Then I heard the screams." His voice broke just once. "I ran back in, grabbed who I could. I pulled Bryce and Tara out. I almost got Milo. Almost. But Anna..." He paused. "She went back in for Bandit. That damn horse wouldn't leave. She had the ribbon tied tight around his neck, and she kept yelling, 'He's scared, he won't move without me.' I begged her to come. She just smiled and said, 'I'll get him.'" Lara closed her eyes. I never saw her again. Alex took a long drag from his cigarette, blew out the smoke like a confession. Afterward, they found only 3 bodies. Said maybe the 4th burned completely. But I always wondered, always feared. Maybe we just didn't look hard enough. Lara stepped forward, pulled the red ribbon from her pocket, still knotted with the small AK charm. Alex's breath caught. "She's still there," Lara said. "I found the clearing. Bandit led me." He remembered. The man stared at the ribbon for a long time, like it was a ghost in his hand. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. "I can take you there," he said. "I remember the land better than I remember faces. But if we go tomorrow." Dawn. They met at the end of the lane, just as the sky bruised with morning. Lara rode Bandit. Alex walked a walking stick in one hand, a canvas bag in the other. They said nothing. The air between them didn't require it. The path they followed was old, almost erased. But Alex never hesitated. He pointed out landmarks others would have missed: a crooked post, a tree with initials carved near the roots, a half-buried horseshoe. "You know," he said at one point, "I never told anyone this. But Anna used to talk about ghosts. She'd sit in the loft and say, 'They whisper to me sometimes. They don't scare me.' We all thought it was just make-believe, a kid's imagination." Lara didn't answer. She didn't need to. Alex's voice held the rest. She wasn't afraid to die. I think that's what broke me most. She was brave, too brave. By mid-morning, they reached the clearing, the site of the old barn. Lara hadn't returned since placing the charm on the soil. But everything was as she left it, except for Bandit, who stopped dead in his tracks and let out a low, mournful sound. Alex stepped into the wreckage, removed his hat, and stood in silence. Then he knelt. "You were right, girl," he murmured. "You always were." Lara came beside him, the ribbon clutched in her hand. Alex pulled a small spade from his bag. "Let's give her back to the world." They dug carefully, methodically, not far, just beneath the place Bandit had indicated days ago. It didn't take long. A small set of remains, tattered cloth, a pair of melted boots, and nestled in the ash, a half-charred brush engraved with AK. Lara wept quietly. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just the kind of tears that come when something long believed is finally painfully confirmed. Alex covered his face. "I left her," he said. "I left her in there." "No," Lara whispered. "She left herself. For him." They wrapped the remains in a linen cloth. Lara tied the red ribbon around it, not as a binding, but as a promise. They called the authorities, told the truth, gave them names, dates, coordinates. It would take days, maybe weeks, for forensics to confirm what they already knew. But the healing had begun. As they left the clearing, Alex paused beside Bandit. "You brought her home," he said. "You brought me home." Bandit dipped his head. For a moment, Lara thought she saw something pass between them. Grief, forgiveness, something older than language. Alex turned to Lara. "Whatever happens next," he said, "don't let them turn this into just another report. Tell the story. Tell her story." Lara nodded. She would. The ruins didn't speak. They whispered. Lara stepped through what remained of Pine Hollow's southern fence, a line of charred posts leaning like tired soldiers, and into the heart of a place swallowed by time and flame. The earth here felt different. Heavier. As if it still held its breath, unsure whether to release the past or keep it buried. Around her, the skeleton of the stable stood half-sunk in ash and ivy. Walls blackened by fire beams collapsed in jagged shapes and patches of foundation, peeking out like brittle memories. Somewhere nearby, a rusted bell dangled from a bent pole, the rope long gone. It had once called children to breakfast, to saddles, to laughter. Now it only moved when the wind begged it to. Lara didn't hesitate. She moved slowly, deliberately, the soles of her boots brushing against broken tile, old nails, scorched leather straps curled like dead snakes. Her eyes searched not for what remained, but for what had tried to survive. Bandit followed without fear. Not one muscle flinched as he stepped onto the blackened concrete. His hooves tapped softly, almost reverently, like he recognized every sound, every shadow. His head moved slowly, eyes tracking something invisible, ghosts Lara couldn't see, but knew he felt. Then beneath a collapsed plank near what had once been the tack room, Lara saw it. Red. She crouched, careful not to disturb the fragile pile of debris, and reached beneath the splintered wood. Her fingers closed on something soft, but brittle, the texture familiar, yet foreign. She pulled gently. A ribbon, or what was left of one. It was scorched, half consumed by fire. The edges blackened, and curled, the center still faintly crimson, as if clinging to its identity. Her breath caught as she turned it over. A tiny piece of metal clung to one end. A charm melted almost beyond recognition, but the engraving was still there, a single letter. A. She cradled it in her hands. A piece of Anna. A fragment of her promise. Lara closed her eyes. The ribbon felt warm. Not from the sun, not from her touch, but from memory. She imagined Anna tying it, looping it around Bandit's neck, laughing as she galloped through these very fields, not knowing they would betray her. She slipped the half-burned ribbon into her coat. Bandit shifted behind her. When Lara opened her eyes, he was staring at the northeast corner of the ruins, ears pricked forward, body tense, not with fear, but with focus. He stepped forward past a broken wheelbarrow, over a cracked drain cover, toward a place where a tree had grown through the foundation. He stopped. Lara followed. The ground here sloped slightly. Beneath, the tree roots had pushed through what remained of the cement floor, curling through rubble like fingers searching for pulse. Bandit lowered his head and let out a deep exhale. It wasn't just breath. It was recognition. Lara crouched beside him, running her fingers along the cracked surface. There were faint impressions in the dust, hoofprints, child's footprints. She wasn't sure, but something had passed here, many times. She took out her notebook. It was small and worn, the leather soft from days of gripping it tightly. Inside were her sketches, Anna's face, Bandit's scar, the red ribbon in different stages of flame. Now she turned to a blank page and began to draw. Not from imagination, from movement. Bandit turned his head as if asking a question. Lara whispered, "Show me." He stepped away from the tree, and so it began. The path was not straight. It never had been. Bandit wove through the overgrowth, cutting through a broken fence line, past a heap of rusted tack boxes and a skeletal lean-to. Every turn, every pause, Lara followed and marked it. The map came alive on the page, raw, crooked, true. He walked as if replaying memories, and she recorded them with reverence. To others, it would look like a girl following a horse through ruins. But Lara knew the truth. This was not a place. It was a memory looped in grief, a living scar, and they were walking its heartbeat. The sun climbed higher. The sky burned gold. At one point, Bandit paused near an old trough now dry and filled with leaves. Lara knelt again. Something about the way the earth shifted felt important. She brushed it with her sleeve and revealed a faded hoof pick. Its handle singed initials carved in shallow notches, BK, Bryce Keating. Anna's cousin. He had died trying to get others out. Lara set the pick beside the ribbon in her coat. Artifacts, evidence, fragments of pain made tangible. She kept sketching. The trails Bandit remembered twisted into a pattern not random, not chaotic. A spiral. A circle closing in on something hidden. At the center, the tree. The same one Bandit had paused beneath first. She returned to it. Now she looked again. There, near the base, partially hidden by roots, was a stone. Not natural. Cut by hand, almost square. She scraped away the moss, carved into it, barely legible, for the ones who ran back. Lara's hands began to shake. Anna hadn't run to escape. She'd run back. Back for Bandit. Back for the others. This place wasn't just ruins. It was a secret graveyard for courage, and someone had marked it. She didn't know if it was Alex, or another staff member who'd carried guilt in silence. But the message was clear. This wasn't just a tragedy. It was a story rewritten by those who remembered too late. Lara returned to the glade as the sun began to lower. Bandit stood still again, eyes to the horizon. She sat beside him, resting her hand against his scar. "I won't forget her," she said. "I won't let anyone forget." The wind picked up, whistling through the beams, like a distant voice. She took out the half-burned ribbon, held it up to the sun. Its crimson end caught the light. Bandit stepped closer, and for a moment the ribbon fluttered not with the wind, but as if pulled by an invisible hand. Then she tied it around her wrist, not tightly, just enough to feel it, enough to remember. The article had been buried, not literally, but in the digital wasteland of outdated links and defunct blogs where truth went to die quietly. Lara found it anyway. Not because it was easy to locate, but because she knew what she was looking for. And because someone had once tried very hard to make sure no one else would find it. The byline read, Maeve Linton. She was younger in the photo, hair wild, smile defiant. But the fire in her eyes hadn't faded in print. Beneath her name, the headline burned like kindling. The Pine Hollow Fire. Accidental blaze or cover-up. The piece had been published 5 years ago, then taken down within 48 hours. Lara found a cached version, distorted, missing images, but the text still intact. As she read, her hands began to shake. Maeve hadn't asked questions. She had answered them. With receipts. With whistleblower statements. With discrepancies in the fire report timeline. With evidence of tampered witness testimonies. And just beneath the surface of her words, rage. Rage at how quickly the deaths of 4 children had been labeled tragic but accidental. Rage that no one questioned how a horse with a GPS chip simply vanished. Rage that a fire alarm system freshly installed a month before had mysteriously failed at 2:13 a.m. Just minutes before the blaze ignited. Maeve had demanded a reopening of the investigation. Instead, she'd been silenced, fired from her column, attacked online, labeled unstable, obsessed, emotional. Her name dropped off the journalistic radar like a ghost slipping into fog, but she hadn't disappeared. Not completely. Lara printed the article, folded it, and tucked it into her sketchbook. Then she took Bandit and rode. The city was an hour away, loud and gray and restless. Lara didn't know exactly where Maeve lived, but she remembered the address from the bottom of the article, a small office space above a flower shop. It was still there. Dustier. The mailbox rusted. But the door had a nameplate scratched, but legible. Maeve Linton. Investigative writer. No soliciting. Lara knocked. No answer. She knocked again. From behind the door came the shuffle of feet. Then silence. "I'm not here to sell anything," Lara called. "I'm here because of Anna Keating." That got the lock turning. The woman who opened the door was not the same as in the photo. Older, tired, hair tied back in a rushed defensive bun, dark circles under wary eyes. But the fire was still there. Maeve narrowed her eyes. "How do you know that name?" Lara held up the printout. Maeve blinked, once, then opened the door wider. Inside the office looked half abandoned. Stacks of old files, dusty monitors, a wall-sized corkboard covered in string and pins like a murder mystery no one had solved. Lara sat. She spoke clearly, calmly, relaying everything Bandit. The ribbon, the ruins, the map, the half-burned charm, the whispers of a child who never made it out. Maeve listened without interruption. Then she lit a cigarette, leaned back, and said, "I knew I wasn't crazy." The next few days moved like blood beneath bruised skin, slow pulsing, inevitable. Maeve returned to her files. Reopened archives she had once been too tired to fight for. The moment Lara brought her the sketch of the underground tunnel Bandit had led them near an old ventilation shaft sealed after the fire, something clicked. "I wrote about that," Maeve said. "It was on the original building plans. Staff used it for storage runs. The fire report said it collapsed before rescue could even try it. But I found photos from the day after still intact." She pinned Lara's map beside it. They lied. The realization wasn't new. But saying it aloud felt like breaking ground again. "They said lightning caused the fire," Maeve went on. "But the weather reports show no strikes in that area for a 20-mile radius that night." "They blamed wiring," Lara said. "And yet the wiring inspection report 3 weeks prior came back clean," Maeve added. I tried to bring that up. "You know what they told me?" Lara shook her head. "They told me no one wants to hear conspiracies about dead children." Maeve didn't go to the authorities. She knew better. They would shut it down again. File it under grieving hysteria or childhood trauma. They needed more, not just fire. They needed motive, and Maeve thought she had found one. Behind the glossy photos and sanitized eulogies, the Pine Hollow camp had received 2 anonymous donations totaling nearly $800,000, 6 months before the fire. The funds were undocumented, redirected through shell companies, and routed through a now-defunct foundation linked to real estate developers. "You know what happened 2 weeks after the fire?" Maeve asked, tossing a paper onto the desk. Lara leaned in. "Approval to demolish Pine Hollow and convert the land into a private retreat. A luxury wellness resort." Lara felt like vomiting. "They didn't just let those kids die," Maeve whispered. "They used them." Bandit seemed to understand everything. When Lara returned from the city, she rode him straight to the hill overlooking the ruins. He stood still, looking down, not at the ashes, but at what was beneath them. Justice, not for himself, for her. Lara slid off his back, leaned her forehead against his. "We're not just looking for the truth," she said. "We're going to burn the lie." And Bandit, silent, broke, and resurrected, closed his eyes, as if in agreement. Alex hadn't spoken in over an hour. They stood at the edge of the glade, shadows stretching long and narrow beneath the late afternoon sun. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was heavy, expectant, like the air before a storm. Lara held the worn map she had drawn from Bandit's movements. Folded and refolded, it now felt like a living thing in her hands. Bandit stood nearby, still as stone, his eyes fixed on something beyond the visible world. Then Alex spoke. His voice was barely above a whisper, and every word sounded like it had to be pushed through gravel. "I saw him." Lara turned her head. Alex didn't meet her eyes. He was looking somewhere far behind her, somewhere only he could still see. "The night of the fire. I wasn't even supposed to be there. I'd stayed late to check on one of the colts. It had been spooked earlier that day. I was walking back toward the bunkhouse when I saw him. A man, standing outside the barn." Bandit shifted. "He wasn't one of ours. Wore a dark coat. No ID, no staff badge. He was calm, too calm." Lara waited. Alex took a trembling breath. He lit a match. I remember the way his face looked in the flame, like he was watching a piece of art burn. Then he dropped it into the straw near the gas tanks. Lara's chest tightened. She said nothing. I ran toward him. Alex continued, his voice trembling, but he saw me. And that's when he pointed. Not with a weapon. With a phone. "What did he say?" Lara asked. Alex finally looked at her. His eyes were glassy. Tired. He said, "This isn't your fight. Walk away and you keep breathing. Open your mouth and they'll bury more than horses." Lara felt the earth shift beneath her. After the fire, I told the police I didn't see anything. They thanked me. Patted me on the back for trying to save the kids. I wanted to scream, but I was afraid. She watched his jaw tighten. I lived in silence for 7 years, thinking I was the last coward Anna ever saw. Lara took a step toward him. "You're not." And then Bandit moved. He turned from the clearing and began to walk. They followed. It was nearly dusk when they reached the tree. A great oak, ancient, split down the middle by lightning. Long ago, its hollow center now softened by time and moss. It stood alone in a meadow Lara had never seen before, circled by half-toppled fence posts and wild buttercups. The air smelled faintly of rain, though no clouds had gathered. Bandit approached it like a ritual. He stopped at the base, lowered his head, and waited. Lara stepped forward, heart hammering. She used to play here, Alex murmured. Tied the ribbon to that lowest branch. Said it was her secret stable. Lara knelt the earth, cool beneath her knees. She placed her hands in the grass, sweeping away layers of fallen leaves. Brittle twigs, forgotten years. Something called to her fingertips. Not sound, not sight. Memory. She dug slowly, bare hands moving the soil with reverence. The first inch gave way to roots and rock. The second gave way to darkness. Then fabric. Tattered, buried, stained with soil, but unmistakable, a piece of cotton sleeve, pale blue, trimmed in lace, torn, faded. She kept going. The bones were small, fragile, not buried deeply, just hidden, as if someone had covered them in haste or shame. Lara sat back on her heels, her fingers trembling. She didn't cry. Not yet. Alex dropped to his knees beside her, hand over his mouth. Dear God. And there, nestled beside the remains, was a ribbon. Red, still knotted, still looped gently around what had once been a wrist. No words, only breath. And then Bandit stepped forward, lowering his head until his muzzle touched the dirt beside Anna. He did not move. He did not blink. The scene stretched in silence. Only the wind moved gently like fingers combing through hair. Somewhere far off, a mourning dove called once, then went still. Lara closed her eyes. A single tear slid down her cheek, not because it was Anna, but because at last someone had found her. The envelope sat untouched on the detective's desk. Lara's hand stayed clasped in her lap. Beside her, Maeve didn't say a word she'd learned long ago, when silence said more than protest. Across from them, the senior officer shifted uncomfortably in his seat, glancing down at the documents as if they might bite. This is a very serious allegation, he said finally. It's not an allegation, Lara answered. It's a burial site. The word hung there dry and unflinching. The officer cleared his throat. We'll review it carefully. These things take time. How much time does a dead child deserve? Maeve asked quietly. He didn't respond. Lara leaned forward. There are photographs. Bone analysis, an ID bracelet. You have my map. You have the article. You have the records of the fire. What else do you need? Still, the officer avoided her eyes. It's complicated. This camp was connected to people, donors, councils. The development was approved by... So bury it again, Maeve snapped. That's what you're saying. No, I'm saying, he exhaled hard. I'm saying we'll handle it internally, discreetly. Lara stood up. Something in her had changed since the tree, since the ribbon in the dirt, since the hollowed bones spoke louder than any adult in the room. She looked down at the envelope. You'll do nothing, she said, because doing nothing costs less. He opened his mouth, but she was already walking out. The courthouse steps were colder than expected. Lara had never stood in front of a camera before. Never seen her face lit by media lights, never heard her voice echo through microphones lined like rifles in front of her. But there she was. Behind her, Maeve, Alex, her grandparents, and Bandit, still patient, as if the storm around them had no weight. The crowd was small at first. A few reporters, curious locals, people who recognized the name Anna Keating, but couldn't place the ache behind it. Then Maeve began to speak. She told them about the fire, the falsified records, the hidden donation trail. She didn't shout. She didn't accuse. She unfolded the truth like a wound. Then she stepped back and Lara took the microphone. She was 12. She had no public speaking training, but she had something they didn't, truth that bled. My name is Lara Morgan, she began, and I'm not here to hurt anyone. I'm here because a girl named Anna died and no one ever said her name again. She told them about the dreams, about the ribbon, about Bandit finding his way back to the place where time stopped. She didn't die in that fire because of bad luck, Lara said, voice steady now. She died because someone wanted to cover something up, and everyone let them. Gasps echoed from the crowd. I'm not here to punish, she said. I'm here to bring her home. And then gently, Lara pulled the red ribbon from her coat, burned at the edges, tied in a loose knot. She raised it towards the cameras, not as a symbol of rage, but of remembrance, a tether between two worlds. Later that night, the footage aired. First local, then national, then viral. The backlash was immediate. Some called her a liar, others a savior. Message boards filled with conspiracy threads and demands for investigations. Parents who had once sent their children to Pine Hollow asked questions they hadn't dared for years. Anna Keating's name trended for the first time since her obituary. But for Lara, none of that mattered. What mattered was that her voice, Anna's voice, had finally broken through the silence. The next morning, Maeve walked into her office to find a white envelope on the floor. No return address. Inside was a flash drive. One file, unmarked. She opened it. Security footage, grainy, dated the night of the fire. It showed a man in a dark coat, carrying a gas can, a lighter. He turned toward the camera, once blurred, but clear enough to recognize the outline of someone tied to the real estate development company that had funded the Pine Hollow rebuild. Maeve didn't speak for a long time. Then she called Lara. "We have him," she said. Lara didn't cry. Not this time. She only whispered, "Then it's time." The press conference was louder, bigger, but Lara stayed silent for it. She didn't need the microphone now. She had already said what mattered. Back home, she found Bandit waiting by the orchard. She walked up and rested her hand on his scar. "They heard her," she said. Bandit blinked slowly, and Lara smiled, not because the world was fixed, but because it had finally begun to listen. The grave was small, no marble, no sculpture, just a modest stone flat, and unadorned, bearing a single name, Anna Keating. Below it, loved, lost, returned. The funeral took place on a cold Sunday morning. The sky held back rain with the same restraint the crowd held back tears. There weren't many people, maybe 30 at most, but each one stood silently, like punctuation at the end of a long forgotten sentence. Alex was the first to arrive. He wore a dark suit that didn't fit anymore, too loose in the shoulders and frayed at the cuffs. His hands trembled when he placed a white lily on the soil. Then he knelt, and for a long time he said nothing. No prayer, no apology, just presence. Maeve came next, her camera slung at her side, unused. She didn't take pictures. Some stories weren't for headlines. She laid a folded copy of her original article on the headstone secured with a smooth stone. It fluttered once in the breeze, then settled. The rest followed, quiet villagers who remembered the camp, or remembered Anna, or remembered silence. Teachers, riders, mechanics, old students, even those who'd signed petitions to turn the place into condos, showed up with bowed heads and no excuses. And then Lara came holding the red ribbon like a thread between time and forgiveness. She wore a simple dress, her hair tied back, her boots covered in dirt. Her grandfather stood beside her. Her grandmother pressed a handkerchief into her palm and whispered, "You did good, child. You brought her home." Lara approached the grave. Bandit walked behind her. He moved like he was carrying centuries. He stopped directly beside the headstone and lowered his head until his nose nearly brushed the earth. Then he went still, so still he barely seemed alive. His breath came slow, measured, as if he were waiting for something, or maybe offering something of himself. Lara stepped forward. She knelt, tied the red ribbon gently around a wooden marker they had driven into the soil. Not a flag, not a warning, a promise. And then something strange happened. The sun broke through the clouds, not brightly, not dramatically, but just enough to touch the grave with light. Bandit didn't react. He stood there, unmoving, eyes half closed. People began to leave. One by one, they laid things by the grave, a drawing, a charm bracelet, a torn photograph. Bits of memory that had nowhere else to belong. Forgiveness isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. But in that field, for those few who stayed, it was thick in the air. Eventually, only 4 remained, Lara, Alex, Maeve, and Bandit. Lara didn't speak. She simply placed her hand on Bandit's neck, leaned her head against his shoulder, and exhaled. "I think she's ready," she whispered. And Bandit moved. He turned his head toward the woods, stared into the darkness between the trees. And then he walked. No nudge, no cue, just a single choice. He passed the line of wild grass at the edge of the field. Then the first trees, then the deeper brush, and then he was gone. No gallop, no drama. He simply disappeared. That night, Lara didn't sleep. She lay in bed when the window cracked open, the night air cool against her face. The stars were out, sharp and wide and endless. She listened for hooves, for breath, for that low, familiar snort in the dark. But nothing came. The barn was silent, the pasture empty. At dawn she stepped outside. She moved slowly, not out of fear, but reverence. She walked the familiar path down to the old wooden gate of the stable, the hinges squealing softly as she pushed it open. And there, tied gently around the gate's center post, was the red ribbon. Whole again, clean, unburned. It danced in the breeze like it had been waiting to be seen. Lara didn't cry. She smiled, because Bandit hadn't left. He had finished. Spring arrived late that year, like a cautious visitor testing the air before knocking. But it came nonetheless. In the fields that once held only silence, the wind now carried something softer. Laughter, hooves in rhythm, the sharp whistle of children daring each other to race. Where the ground had been trampled by grief, grass pushed its way back into the light. And Lara Morgan was changing, not loudly, not suddenly, but undeniably. She still walked the same paths, still woke before dawn, still kept the ribbon now tied gently around her wrist, like a reminder that didn't bruise. But there was a difference in her eyes, something no longer looking for the past, but leading toward the future. She had begun to ride again. The horse wasn't Bandit. It was a mare named Iris, gentle golden with white socks and an old injury to her hind leg that made her gait imperfect. But Lara didn't mind. Imperfect was honest. She didn't ride alone either. At first, it was just one boy from the village, curious and brave, who asked if he could follow her down the old trail. Then another girl. Then two more. Within weeks, there were 6 children helmets, 2 big reins, 2 loose, but smiles wide enough to split the sky. Lara didn't teach them how to ride like an instructor would. She showed them the way Bandit had shown her, slowly, silently letting the land speak first. They followed the trails he once walked, stopped beneath the same sycamore trees, sat on the old stone wall where she once sketched maps by moonlight. Some of them asked about him. She never told the full story, only that he had been a friend, one of the quiet ones who spoke without sound and never stayed too long. On the last Friday of April, the village library hosted a reading. Maeve stood at the podium, holding a copy of her new book, The Red Thread, A Story of Fire, Memory, and Home. She hadn't intended to write it. She said as much in her opening. "I wasn't planning on telling this story," she said to the crowded room, "because I thought it belonged to ghosts. But ghosts don't need silence. They need witness." The audience was full. Journalists, students, survivors, families of the children lost to Pine Hollow. The Keatings were there. Anna's mother clutched her daughter's red charm bracelet in one hand and her husband's in the other. Neither had spoken to press since the fire. But tonight they were here. Maeve opened the book and read the first page. It began not with the blaze or the corruption or the aftermath. It began with Lara, with the sound of hooves in the fog, with the image of a girl who listened when the world told her not to. The book hit #1 within a week, but Maeve didn't care. She cared that someone remembered. It took Alex longer to speak. The town had forgiven him before he forgave himself. They said he had tried. They said he had suffered. But he carried a particular kind of guilt, the kind that doesn't soften with time, only changes shape. Then one Sunday morning after service, he stepped up to the pulpit uninvited. The pastor moved aside. Alex stood there, old hat in hand, voice rough as stone. He didn't read from a script. He just told the truth. "I saw a little girl run into a burning barn," he said, "and I saw myself freeze." No one interrupted. "I've carried that moment in my chest for 7 years. I gave up horses, gave up people. But a child found me again. And through her, Anna found her way home." He turned toward the Keatings. "I was the last one who saw your daughter alive. And I am sorry. For the silence, for the shame, for everything." Anna's mother stood, walked up the aisle, and took his hand. It was enough. That afternoon, Lara returned to the grove, alone. The wind played with the trees the way it always had, careless, soft, free. The ribbon was still tied to the gatepost, slightly faded now, but whole. She untied it, carried it with her, past the old trail markers, past the field where she and Bandit had first met, past the split oak where the grave had been sealed, and into the quiet pocket of forest that held no fear anymore. She stopped at a clearing, sat down cross-legged, and tied the ribbon to a branch. Let it dance. A girl's laughter echoed, real or not, she couldn't tell. But it filled her. They named him Ash. The foal was born just before dawn, in the quiet hush of a spring morning, when the mist curled low across the paddocks, like breath over glass. He was strong from the beginning, standing on shaky legs within minutes, eyes wide and blinking against the light. His coat was dark like Bandit's, but across his left shoulder a mark shimmered through the hair, a pale silvery white streak shaped almost impossibly like a curved thread. A ribbon. No one said it aloud, but everyone saw it. Lara stood by the stable gate, hands wrapped gently around the old red ribbon that had once marked the start of everything. It had been washed, but the edges were still frayed, burned in places, stained with soil and time. She approached the foal quietly. His mother nuzzled him, protective but calm. He didn't flinch when Lara stepped into the stall. He turned toward her, as if already familiar with the sound of her footsteps. She crouched down slowly. "You've been here before," she whispered. "Maybe not like this, but still." Then she lifted the ribbon and tied it loosely around his neck, just enough to rest against the fur over the white mark, as if the ribbon had always belonged there. "Your journey's just beginning," she said. She stepped back, watching the foal take a few uncertain steps forward, the ribbon fluttering with each motion. And in that moment, Lara understood something, not through logic, not through words, but through stillness. The story hadn't ended. It had shifted. It had become. That afternoon, Lara visited the ridge. The same ridge Bandit had once galloped across under fog and fire and grief. The same one she had stood upon as a child lost in dreams. A girl clinging to symbols because reality had offered none. Now she was different. She rode Iris up the trail, the foal trailing behind his ribbon, catching the wind like a flag unbound from time. Lara's hair danced across her shoulders, her back straighter, her hands surer. She reached the summit just as the fog began to rise again, thick and white and alive. For a moment the world below disappeared. No fences, no towns, no graves. Just cloud and breath and memory. She dismounted. The foal stopped beside her, watching her with that same quiet understanding she had once seen in Bandit. Lara untied the ribbon, held it high, and then with a soft, steady breath, she let it go. It caught the wind, immediately spun once, then sailed upward red against the white sky, climbing higher and higher until it was lost in the blur between air and sun. Lara smiled. Behind her, the camera would have captured the moment like a painting, the girl, the horse, the fog, the sky. A whisper without sound, a prayer without words, a promise kept. Later that evening, a letter arrived. It was handwritten with Maeve's name signed in ink at the bottom and the words "For Lara" scrawled across the envelope in careful block print. Inside a single page. Sometimes the stories we carry aren't ours to end. Sometimes they continue inside others, reshaped but not broken. You gave her that. You gave all of us that. Maeve P.S. He would have been proud. I think we all know that. Lara folded the letter and placed it beneath her pillow. Weeks passed. Spring thickened into summer. The old barn was never rebuilt, but the land was cleared, cleaned, planted with wildflowers. A wooden bench was added beneath the oak tree. A plaque beside it read, "For those who remembered, for those who ran back, and for those who never left." People came often, not to cry, to walk, to sit, to breathe. The Keatings came with a picnic basket and stayed for hours talking about Anna like she was still somewhere between sentence and shadow. Alex brought apples for the new foal. Maeve, once a ghost in her own profession, now spoke at schools about courage, grief, and journalism that listens more than it interrupts. And Lara, she lived fully. She taught writing lessons in the afternoons, helped fix fences in the mornings, and wrote letters to herself at night. She didn't need Bandit to walk beside her anymore, to know that he had never left. Some bonds outlive bodies. Some stories don't need endings, only someone willing to carry them forward. The final shot, if this were a film, would be this. Lara galloping across a meadow just before dusk, fog beginning to rise. A younger child riding behind her on another horse, laughing. The foal Ash running freely alongside the wind, catching the white mark on his shoulder. And tied to his mane, caught high in the air. The red ribbon, still flying, still here, still healing. The end. Let me know if you'd like the full story formatted into screenplay structure, voiceover adaptation, or subtitles for video. You've just finished building a powerful, complete, 77-minute cinematic narrative. Sometimes it begins with a whisper, a sound not caught by ears, but by something older. Something that lives beneath breath, beneath words. It carries through fog, through silence, through the space between hoofbeats and heartbeats. That was how Lara first heard Bandit, not with her ears, but with whatever part of her still believed the dead could speak. Theirs was never just a story about a girl and a horse. It was about a boundary crossed, a language built in fragments, ribbon, scar, breath, a trust born from absence. And in that space where grief once sat like a stone in the chest, something impossible took root. People asked afterward what had made her follow him, why she had trusted a creature declared long dead, a ghost with weight and warmth and purpose. Why she hadn't questioned the dreams, the ribbon, the path through shadows. The answer wasn't logic, it was recognition. That some bonds refuse to be broken even by fire. In a world built on denial, Lara had chosen to listen. And by listening, she exposed what many had spent years burying. That systems protect themselves first, that truth can be dangerous in small hands. That silence isn't always peace. It's often compliance. The fire at Pine Hollow wasn't an accident. It was engineered, not just in flame, but in memory. In the rewriting of records, in the refusal to ask why a child disappeared and a horse never returned. And when Lara stepped forward barely more than a child herself, she didn't do so to destroy. She did it to name Anna, to name Bandit, to name the wound, because only what is named can begin to heal. And healing in this story came slowly. It came in an old man's trembling confession, in a woman reopening her pen to tell the story she had once been shamed for, in townspeople showing up not with defense, but with open palms and silence that meant listening. It came through Lara, leading younger kids down the trails Bandit once carved, teaching them how to listen, how to ride without reins, without control, only presence, how to trust what moved beneath the surface. But none of it would have mattered. None of it would have lasted without the thread. The red ribbon, tied first in a child's hands, carried through flame, left in ashes, recovered from bone, retied to a foal who bore its shape in fur. The ribbon wasn't just a memory. It was a guide, a tether between the seen and unseen, between the world that forgets and the one that insists on remembering. It led Lara. It led Bandit. It led us. Even now they say the red ribbon still hangs in the stables. Sometimes it's tied to the gatepost, sometimes to a young rider's saddle, and sometimes no one knows how it ends up in the wind, caught midair, dancing like laughter, like forgiveness, like someone returned, not to stay, but to remind that the journey does not end. It transforms. And if you're quiet, very quiet, you'll hear it whisper too.